All right, that's it. As I mentioned to you, Steve, I told you I'm not going to smile this time, and then the video comes on, and sorry, can't help it. To our audience, I apologize. There's going to come a point in this series where we will stop leading with laughing and why we're laughing at that intro. But every time I see it, I can't get enough. Steve, cheers.
Phil, cheers.
How you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm hoping that our LinkedIn Live captured the intro because last time it cut it off before it was there, and so we were laughing and people didn't know why. But again, I think it's just our gift to the world is that intro because if it makes other people smile, laugh half as much as it does for us, then we have created a really good content piece there.
So I told the person on the American FinTech Council team that manages our social media that from now on, we don't need to repost or post the entire conversation between, you and I, but just, that first 12 seconds. It's really all you need. That'll generate, we'll break the internet. I think.
Right.
Right? You think so? Like that's enough?
For sure. And I can give her that file if she wants. And she can just put on loop mode if you really want to drive traffic to your site.
See, Steve, that's what we should both do. We should be in the sheet video making category. That's sort of where we should shift our time and our energy.
I'm wondering if there are any awards we can nominate ourselves for, or our listeners. I
was sitting with someone literally on Friday last week who said and we were actually talking strategy, sharing a drink, and said, Phil, is it really the same if we're not recording ourselves talking? And I was like, no, you can actually have private conversations nowadays, right? You don't need to necessarily record. But I love, again, how it continues to sort of continue to come up in conversations, sort of reference back to sort of what we've been doing. And again, I think the goal and purpose of this is really just have a good time. I think you and I spend so much time sort of talking and sort of sharing sort of what we're doing, and the idea of getting to do this with you, I think is just exciting. I'm happy I get to do it.
Not as happy as I am. I'm going to go ahead and claim that. No, I think it's like my thought was like you and I are having these conversations, and my kids probably know more about fintechs than the majority of the population, but like instead of having my kids listen to it, like Phil and I are going to have it. Let's just have it in an open forum, a fun forum, and hopefully we can provide some insights. And we are going to get some guests on here. That is a priority that we've set for ourselves. We just haven't made it happen yet, but coming soon to an episode near you.
Yeah, and by the way, it's not because of a lack of interest. I think the challenge is always just scheduling. Given sort of what Steve is up to and what I'm up to, and trying to get just the two of our schedules aligned to get on these conversations is often tricky, and so looping other parties into it has been really, really tricky. But that's part of the excitement. I'll say it's funny. We have joked on our social media feeds this morning. We're like, we're going into the summer months, right? State legislative sessions are starting to wind down. Many have already. As a matter of fact, I think Illinois went until 4:30 on Sunday morning. 4:30 in the morning on Sunday. New York is scheduled to end this week. So state legislative sessions are winding down. And I think for our listeners, in certain, we talk mostly about BaaS, obviously embedded finance, innovative bankings. Those states tend to have companies tend to have less state-to-state challenges. Outside of certain things we've seen, usury caps, a lot of our banks are partnering with lenders or having, sometimes have issues with usury caps. And we're working now with a bunch of our colleague trades about DIDMICA opt-outs, which would probably be a subject of a whole nother conversation that you and I should have. But as states wind down, it sort of we start to refocus, reshift about kind of what the next legislative session is going to look like in 27, but also maybe, now as sort of the federal government over the next 6 months to really take all of our efforts and our energy and our resources and push it into grabbing the attention of members of Congress and regulators. I know that they're somewhat distracted with primary elections and general elections coming up in November, But again, sort of an opportunity now for the next 6 months to really try and move the needle. And so, it's funny, you and I often talk, we're like, oh, last week with Memorial Day was a little bit quiet, right? Last week was a little bit of a quiet week, but as we're talking and I'm thinking through kind of what's ahead, and this is sort of where this all started, this should be a quiet June, right? Quiet summer, quiet, but this is arguably going to be one of our busiest. And so I'm excited to continue to dig in and continue to find ways to bring value, not just to our membership, but to the wider ecosystem.
Well, I wasn't exactly sure where you were going there. I thought at first you were going to claim that you were kind of like a school teacher. You get the summers off. But
no, sir.
I could say that my parents were both teachers. I have a strong admiration for them, but I still look for the opportunity to give you a hard time. But no, I think it's yes, from a legislative standpoint, that it may slow down the news, but there's still going to be a lot of things happening and preparing for a busy fall, especially after the elections when the politicians are no longer afraid of taking action. That so much is going to happen, and it's an exciting time. But yeah, there it didn't seem like there was a lot this last week, but you never know when that blockbuster announcement's just gonna just come on the news. So it's what are we going to talk about today, Bill?
No, it's two things. So number one, I think we should talk about elections. And I will say is that I don't want to talk about elections because I don't want to talk about politics. We can do another show for that. I certainly, don't want to talk about politics because oftentimes that has the unique ability these days to create significant conflict. And so I don't think I want to talk about politics, but I do think, it's funny, and I could have transitioned with all of that better. The political season is upon us, right? And that has significant implications. And I think, without sort of talking about, which way where anybody is leaning or which way, sort of anybody wants to lean, I think it's important to understand sort of what the implications of that are. And I spoke just a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and I think also something we failed to mention, sort of the major conference season is over, right? Conference season doesn't start again until late August, early September, and so spring conference season is sort of behind us. But what I often said throughout the circuit was this thought that, because we have a Republican in the White House and a Republican administration, right, and that will last for the next 2.5 years, there was the sentiment of well, we have 2.5 years before we have to think about a potential change. Now, I'm not going to predict who's going to win in 2028. But I tried very hard to explain to folks that we don't have 2.5 years, right? Because I think, we learned our lesson going back to 2016 administration shift and then saw what happened in the 2020 administration shift, and that whatever we're going to do, we've got to do it right away, right? We've got to do it right now. And I think you and I have covered this a bit, but I wanted to talk for maybe a little bit about sort of the midterm elections and how that is going to have an impact, right? And so, again, without getting into the redistricting fight state to state, I will say is that it's anybody's call which house or which party is going to control the House of Representatives. There are some that say even the Senate is potentially in play. What are the implications if there is a flip in one of those houses on our regulators, even in a Republican administration? I think that's critically important to understand is that right now, I think I have praised, and I think you agree, regulators have been doing a really, really responsible job. Not because, it's a Republican administration and there is, they're letting people do what they want. It's quite the opposite. They have been serious, thoughtful regulators, FDIC, OCC, the Fed have been the leaders in those agencies have been thoughtful regulators. But they, even though they have been before Congress, the tone from Congress is obviously different. If the Democrats were to take the House in November, come January, when the new Congress takes their seats, you're going to see a very, very different oversight function, where Democrats are going to do everything they can to create sort of challenges for the perceived deregulatory tenor coming out of the federal agencies, even though, again, you and I have talked about this, that doesn't necessarily exist. But there will be different challenges, and I think that will fundamentally take away some of the time, attention from the real pragmatic work that I think we've been doing over the last 12 to 18 months.
So I think the big takeaway is you're wanting to start recording Trump and tequila.
Trump. I waited the whole time that I was talking. You were thinking about like, how do we possibly build in more?
Oh no, I've been
alcohol to these
sitting on it. I've been
conversations?
burst. Like I've had that, and I'm just like, hurry up, Phil. Hurry up.
I don't know why you let me talk. Whenever you get me going, like it just, it's hard for me to stop. I think too many of our colleagues in this ecosystem think that we've had so much time to go, right? And I'll just point, by the way, it's hard to get to step one. You got to kind of really concretize those steps if you want it to last, if there is a shift. And we're, again, if the Democrats are to win the midterm elections in either the Senate or the House, I think federal regulators are going to have to deal with that in a real way. That is not to say, like I said, I want to, there's so many disclaimers. I feel like when you and I have these conversations, I feel like I'm always throwing out disclaimers. I don't know who is going to win in the midterms. If the Democrats win and they do increase their oversight over federal regulators, that is not to say that I think the federal regulators are doing anything wrong, right? Again, all the disclaimers out there, I do think it's going to change the dynamic in Washington. And I talk about what is, going into a quiet summer. This is anything but a quiet summer, and we're doing everything that we can from an AFC perspective to gear up for it, to continue our education efforts, and to think through what we can get accomplished in the next 6 months, that if the tone and the tenor does change, we're able to sort of really build some things today that I think we'll be able to sort of solidify over the next 2 years, so that whatever happens in 28 will last. And so, a big part of that is examiner training, right? And Steve, I'm going to turn this around and throw it back to you. I would say since the beginning of this administration, we have talked about, sort of leadership and of agencies having changed, but how much of that has trickled down, and how much of that has made it to regional examiners and at the American FinTech Council, we're creating many opportunities to sort of try and bridge that gap. But again, Steve, you were on the bank side, right? You're on the bank side, right? You've dealt with examiners at the local level. How much of that was a problem, right? You oftentimes would hear the rhetoric in the papers, but how much of that boiled down to what you were hearing on the ground, and how much of that impacted what you were doing day to day?
I think there is impact, and I go back to a conversation that you and I had. I'm pretty sure you're the one expert I know in this area, but like when the new administration came in, there's 18 months at most, because once you're within 6 months of the next election, everyone's gonna be afraid to do anything. And so that, like, you have 18 months, then there's a lull, and another 18 months, another lull, just depending on how that goes. And so it's in that 18 months, I think the first 6 months, at least what I saw, is like, you heard this from Washington, you heard all this, like, oh, we're doing this and this, but it took that trickle down. It took a good 6 months, I would say, before it really got pushed all the way down throughout the regulatory bodies. And it gets, as we've said, it's not that examiners are not doing their job. Like and there's always a look back if they're like, so you can't say, oh, I can get away with whatever, because you never know when that's going to change. And so it takes time, and you can't just point to a headline. My guiding principle when it comes to examiners and regulators is the same thing would be when I'm talking to you, Phil. Let's talk about it. Let's be open and honest and have that conversation. I'm not going to do anything without integrity. But I do want to, like, for me, I'm going to try to push that envelope to be as innovative as I can in a compliant manner. And so if I'm talking to an examiner, how can I partner with you to make sure you're comfortable with what I'm doing, knowing that I'm going to operate with compliance number one in mind?
Yeah, communication is key, right? Again, I say if you're doing this the right way, you're communicating early and often, and as much as possible with your regulators. But I think, there's these are big bureaucracies, right? If you look at these federal agencies, right, and sort of the people that run them, they're big bureaucracies, and it's nice to change the tone, but like I said, it's got to work its way down. So we're excited. A big part of our priorities has been sort of really building and bridging that gap and creating opportunities to get examiners involved. We did that, for those of you who participated last year's policy summit. Last year was our 9th annual policy summit. The day after, we did a tech sprint specifically focused on regulatory examination and regulator education. We're continuing those efforts. As a matter of fact, we have an event. We have an AFC event just coming up this week with just risk and compliance staff. And I'm so excited to say that agencies and regulators are going to be in the room. FDIC, OCC, the Fed are going to be in the room with AFC member risk and compliance teams, right? So that we can, have these conversations, right? And talk through what are real issues and real problems and how you build and bridge that gap. But again, I think that's part of what AFC is here to do, right? It's partly, number one, to help our members and educate them, to talk about best practice and create those opportunities for them to network with each other. But anybody who's heard me talk about our risk and compliance network roundtable knows that I get excited because it's great to do it as an industry. When you bring the industry together with the regulators, you create something like, as you and I have just talked about over the last few minutes, is something that is real, that is pragmatic, that is about embracing regulatory oversight, not about avoiding it. And you're able to build real foundations so that you kind of remove the politics and the ideology, right? Elections are no longer important because you're doing what is right. And there's no Democratic way to do it right. And there's no Republican way to do it right. Protecting consumers is universal, right? And innovation is universal when you're doing it right. And that to me is what we need to be building towards.
I think just to be a little political, but I'm not. Like, the majority of America wants to be closer to the middle. Social media has caused you can't voice an opinion unless it aligns with one of the extremes, and it's so that if you are operating like the majority of America, you want to have integrity. You want to be doing the right thing, and that's really where I'm going. Not to be political, I'm not going to change how I operate regardless of who is in whatever office. I'm going to do it in a way that's going to be beneficial, like that, with integrity, compliant, all the things there. So the event you were just talking about is in Chicago. It's the 3rd week of June. Looking forward to it. I think we should at least record 2 episodes there with better sound quality this time. I'll pack mics, but let's get some guests. And if you have any mind, but let's make that happen, Phil.
So we're actually doing 2. We're doing a risk and compliance event next week in Washington, and then our CEOs are coming together in Chicago at the end of the month. And by the way, this is, again, part of it is you want to engage everybody at your member companies, right? You want to engage the legal teams, you want to engage the risk teams, you want to engage the compliance teams, and in Chicago with our CEOs at the end of June. So there's a lot going on. And obviously, all of this is as we lead up and for our big event in November, our summit on November 17th. And so I think it's hard to avoid politics. I mean, you open the papers every morning and sort of it's right in front of you. But I think for a lot of us, we have to look for those opportunities. And we have to look for the opportunities where we can build kind of those coalitions, sort of grow those coalitions, educate regulators, educate examiners, but also make sure, right, hold ourselves accountable, right? Like hold companies accountable, make sure that we are doing it the right way. It's easy for us to criticize regulators when they're pointing out some of the challenges or some of the problems within the ecosystem. I think, we don't ever say that we're perfect, right? And our members never run around and say, oh, we're perfect. And everybody accepts the fact that when you're in emerging industries, you're likely to make a mistake. And it doesn't mean that you were trying to, or you were trying just right. The opposite. You were trying to do it right. You accept it. You saw that, even during sort of the last administration, through the consent orders, there were, as banks and many banks who had gotten consent orders, raised them up and almost like a badge of honor. Yes, I made a mistake. Thank you for helping me understand what that was and where there was sort of holes in my compliance management system. And we're going to work. And you can look at so many of those different examples where banks stood up and said, yes, yeah, we recognize we made mistakes. We're going to fix it. And today, by the way, 2 years, 3 years later, right, you're seeing those banks come out of those consent orders stronger than they ever were before. And that, to me, again, is sort of really exciting, right? right? Because now that is a bank that didn't just avoid getting in trouble. And you always hope that, banks, and fintech companies don't get in trouble are great too, right? You don't have to get in trouble. But those that do and work through it and double down and invest and take the time and fix it, I think we all agree are going to be that much stronger when they come out of it. And again, real kudos to some of those banks who are now coming out of it and really, like I said, building themselves a platform and a foundation for a very successful future.
Yeah, it goes back for me. It's that old saying of, everyone's going to make mistakes. It's how you respond that makes a difference. And that's really you can learn so much from your mistakes. And trust me, I've learned way too much in my life. But like those banks, the intent, I can't the majority of them, a vast majority, if not all, it wasn't like they set out to do something wrong. The intent was right. They made mistakes, or there was this ambiguity in the regulatory environment that they missed something because of that ambiguity. So much to your point, we can all learn from that and do better. We want to avoid consent orders as much as possible. I know we're about to run out of time, Phil. I wouldn't make this offer to anyone. Risk and compliance is obviously a very exciting topic. So if you find a guest and want to record with me remote next week, we can make that happen too. I'll throw that out there, but you'll have to supply the bourbon there. I'll supply it here.
But I tell you, our office in Washington is just as well stocked with bourbon, so no worries there at all. And again, like I said, this is the time, where you really want to lean in to get things done, right? Like I said,
right.
The politics are hard to ignore. Leaning in now over the next 6, 7, 8 months to try and really build something. It's not to say that in the next 2 years with the current administration, we will get nothing done, right? It's going to be a bit more, the nuances are going to be trickier. And so excited for what the summer holds, excited for what the next 6 months holds, and really excited about the future of finance. Hopefully, Steve, working more with you.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I mean, it is amazing time we live in. The amount of change that we're seeing on a almost daily basis, it's just incredible. Can't wait to see you in a couple of weeks, Phil. And if anyone so we didn't dive into a lot of news topics this week because there wasn't a lot of news to dive into. So if there are things you would like for us to cover in these slower cycles, let us know. We're happy to do that. We're going to get some guests on here. This show is it's all about having fun and evolving to just make sure that it's fun for everyone. So, Phil, my friend, cheers. Until next time, always a pleasure. And here's some more bourbon and BaaS.